I hope the Jets can perform as well as this top-notch NFL analyst says they will. Mike Clay of ESPN joins me. It's a Tuesday edition of NY Flight Jets Talk. Let's roll.
Jets, Jets, let's go.
Jets wide receiver Wesley Walker. Wesley, how you doing today? ESPN writer Mr. Rich Samini, Jets reporter for The Athletic Mr. Zach Rosenblatt, Hall of Famer and Jets legend Mr. Marty Lyons.
Your host, Connor Law.
Welcome in, everyone. Here we are on a Tuesday afternoon. Like I said, we are going to be joined by Mike Clay of ESPN. So let's bring him in. Mike, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. You know, I'm on the Jets bandwagon this season, so I've received the invite to all the Jets shows, and it's always fun. You know, some shows I'm not as high on the team, and the conversation isn't super positive. The fans don't like it, but I have a feeling we're gonna have a different vibe here, Connor.
Yeah, so you've been very vocal on the Jets' performance this year. You were recently on the official Jets podcast, where you most recently spoke, and then you recently released your projections for the NFL, where there are a lot of interesting nuggets there on the Jets. First, I'm gonna dive in on your thoughts on the Jets roster. What do you think is the main thing that really separates the Jets roster from the other talented teams in the league, like the 49ers, the Chiefs, the Eagles?
Well, I think for starters, it's the fact that they're up there. They have a roster that's the caliber of teams like the Eagles and the 49ers and even the Chiefs. You know, I think you can make a case just on pure roster talent, top to bottom. The Jets maybe have the best in the NFL. I know a lot of people are going to point to the age of Aaron Rodgers and health, but you know, you can apply that to all these teams. Health is an issue across the entire NFL, not just for the New York Jets. So obviously, the big variable is how good is Aaron Rodgers? That's the big question. You know, does he still have it? Is he still a guy that can play at that MVP level? Or is he a guy that after the major injury and that last down year in Green Bay, has he lost a step and he's now an average or below average quarterback? But here's the thing. With a better offensive line, I'm sure we'll get into it, but with a better offensive line, better defense, better supporting cast in terms of who he's throwing the ball to, I think Aaron Rodgers can play average football this year, be the 15th best quarterback, and the Jets could still be a title contender. That's how good this roster is.
Yeah, I completely agree, and we'll get into the division a little later on. But that's why I feel so confident about the Jets winning this division. You have the Patriots, who are just out of the picture. I mean, they're going to be out of it for a long time, at least in my opinion. The Dolphins got significantly worse this offseason, in my opinion. The Bills lost Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis. The Jets are the only team in that division that got better. And like I've been saying it all along, with a healthy Tyrod Taylor last season, the Jets win 10 games and they're in the playoffs. I mean, you could point to week 3 of the Patriots, the Raiders game, the Falcons game. I mean, there are a ton of games that the Jets could have won last year if they just had average quarterback play. And the thing that I feel so confident about Aaron Rodgers is if I could pick one quarterback in the league, 4th and 10, Super Bowl, 3 seconds left on the clock, who do I want having the ball? I want Aaron Rodgers throwing the football. And, you know, I think going from Zach Wilson, one of the worst quarterbacks in my opinion to ever play the game of football, to now a Hall of Fame level quarterback is going to elevate the play of receivers. I mean, look at Garrett Wilson. 2 years with Zach Wilson, he's put up 1,000 yards both years in the league. Take Zach Wilson, and now you're giving him a Hall of Famer is now throwing Garrett Wilson the ball. And then it's also great for the young guys, Xavier Gibson, who we saw a fine amount of last year, who, you know, talks of him being the starting slot receiver for the Jets. Malachi Corley, who will be staying in the guest house of Aaron Rodgers, who the Jets selected in the 3rd round. They have Allen Lazard, who they brought in from Green Bay. And Mike, speaking of Allen Lazard, I want to get into that because, you know, when your projections for this season first came out, obviously I went right to the Jets and I looked at Allen Lazard. You have him with 40 yards this year. What do you think that main factor is? You don't think Rodgers is going to give him the ball? Because we've seen Rodgers not tolerate what we heard Robert Saleh say about Lazard: lack of effort, drops, and it's going to be really interesting if Lazard has a similar year to like what he had last year, how Rodgers is going to handle that, given that Rodgers kind of brought him to New York and they're friends from Green Bay.
Yeah, look, if he makes the 53-man roster, the projection will go a little higher. This is kind of like first man out, sort of.
Yeah.
You know, maybe he doesn't make this make this 53, because as you pointed out, it's not just the names you listed with Wilson. Of course, Corley, Gibson, and Brownlee played a lot last year, oftentimes ahead of
Mhm.
Lazard or alongside Lazard. But you also bring in Mike Williams, and his injury last year was
Yes.
early in the season, and you would anticipate him making an impact pretty early on in 2024. He should be ready for week one, and if that's the case, you're 4 or 5 deep, assuming you want to keep those young guys on the roster, and that probably means Lazard's the odd man out. So that I wouldn't read too into that. I don't. I think even if he makes the team, he's not going to be an impact player this year. The only probable way is if Williams does miss some time. That probably gives him a path to some playing time, but otherwise, probably not going to happen.
So you see Lazard falling behind guys like Corley, guys like Brownlee, and
Mhm.
maybe even a guy like Irv Charles if he makes the roster as the Jets specialist.
I mean, the Jets should sure hope so. You spend a
Yeah.
day two pick on Corley, you expect him to make an impact, not be playing behind Lazard, who's barely on the roster at this point in his career. So, if this team has Super Bowl aspirations, which they should have, I mean, they absolutely should have.
Yes.
I don't think that's a guy you want to be, your 1 or 2 receiver. He should be further down the depth chart, or perhaps not even on the team. That would be a good thing. If you're cutting Alan Lazard, it probably means these other guys are panning out.
Yeah, so you speak about Malachi Corley and Xavier Gibson there. Those are two names that are competing for the kickoff return man this season, especially with the new rules. It's going to be very interesting to see how teams play this. Who do you end up seeing as the Jets return man? I know you threw Tariq Cohen on your projections,
Mhm.
and he's a really interesting one. I personally have him getting RB4 over Izzy, just for the special teams reasons. We'll go into that a little later, but do you see Gibson getting the vast majority of those reps?
Yeah, so that's tricky. I mean, it's a
Yeah.
new age in terms of projecting kick returns. I mean, it was easy last year. It was like some teams were
Yeah.
barely going to return the ball. There were so many touchbacks. So it is fascinating. I had to do some work on that to figure out exactly how many returns to expect per team. And looking at the XFL and the results there was part of that. So I did go with Xavier Gibson,
Mhm.
just carrying over from last year, but that's even across the whole NFL, that's stuff that's going to have to play out, because I think what you're going to see is more skilled guys that would never return kicks on kickoffs now. It's going to
Yeah.
be it's going to be basically an offensive play. So that is one of the toughest things I've had to project this year, is who is going to return
Mhm.
kicks, because it's going to be so different.
Yeah, I definitely think it's going to be different, and the Jets have a lot of guys competing for the kickoff job, and I think if McCole Hardman, I'm not Malachi Corley wants to get involved in this offense
Mhm.
early, I think that's the best way to do it. Send a signal to Nathaniel Hackett, Robert Saleh, the whole coaching staff that all right, I'm eager to work. I'm going to go ahead and win this kickoff job. It's like what happened with Xavier Gibson and McCole Hardman last year. Jet fans expected McCole Hardman to be that big kickoff guy, touchdown after touchdown. He didn't even win the starting job. Xavier Gibson won it over him. And then when we saw Gibson succeed in the beginning in the return game, they started to get him involved in the offense.
Mhm.
In my opinion, he didn't have a ton of success last year in kickoff. He had that great touchdown week 1, but after that, if you look average to below average play, he had some. I think he fumbled once or twice last year. He had some trouble holding on to the ball, and they had a guy like Cohen. If this is Tariq Cohen 3 years ago, yeah, he's a lock for the 53 man. The thing is, this guy hasn't appeared in an NFL game since week 3 of the 2021 season with the Bears. That's almost 3 full years off. What do we expect out of him? But main reason, before I throw it to you, I have him over Izzy is because, the Jets made it clear that he did not have great blocking last year, as they barely gave him any opportunities. And they sent a message to him. They drafted 2 running backs and signed another running back in free agency. So what do you think it is between Cohen and Izzy? Because I think at the end of the day, either one who doesn't make the 53 man is going to be on the practice squad.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. Or,
Hmm.
sometimes they'll sign elsewhere to try and get another opportunity if they
Yeah.
don't think they have a path. But you're right. Braylon Allen already generating some hype too. Looks like he's slotted in as the 2. So you're right. It's
Yeah.
going to come down to special teams. Might not be kick returner, but just might be, excuse me, some sort of
Hmm.
special teams contribution. So that'll be a camp battle. We'll see. I'm sure he'll get a run all the way through training camp, all the way through the preseason, maybe be a final cut. But you're right. It's gonna come down to special teams for those guys, because they're probably not going to be needed much at running back.
Yeah, you mentioned Braylon Allen there, big power back. Jokes of him possibly being a
Hmm.
defensive lineman. Just looking at his build, he had a ton of success in Wisconsin on the ground. I think he's going to be a ton of fun to watch for us Jet fans. But if you look at his receiving stats in his whole career with Wisconsin, he had 276 or 278 yards, somewhere in that range, with 0 touchdowns. And there's been talks in the spring, OTA's minicamp, that he's actually been catching the ball during these practices and doing something with it. What do you think Jet fans should expect from Braylon Allen in the receiving game?
Yeah, so I think they don't want to see much of it in year one.
Yeah.
You have Brees Hall here after what we saw last season. You expect a big year from Brees Hall. He's going to be a huge part of this offense. Love that guy coming into the NFL. Loved him right out of the gate. Everything was looking great, and then of course had the knee injury. But
Yeah.
fortunately came back strong last season. He was awesome. So look, I know he soaked up a lot of his counting stats in the last 4 or so weeks of the season when the season was basically over. But that doesn't mean he can't put together another huge statistical season. Maybe the volume in the passing game is down a little bit with Aaron Rodgers there. But with Rodgers there, you should get more scoring opportunities. So that's my long way of saying that Hall should be on the field a ton. And that means Braylon Allen is not on the field very much and is just in there to spell him a little bit, give him some plays off. If Hall misses some time, maybe he steps in. But I wouldn't expect a big passing game role for Allen in year one. And I will say this, you can't get too caught up with running backs in the passing game in college just because they don't need to throw it to running backs. The wide receivers are wide open downfield. The quarterbacks can run. They're obviously teams are way run heavier in college than they are in the NFL. So I wouldn't get too caught up in that. But you're right. Allen's skill set might be just like a bigger back that, that's going to get a ton of carries, maybe not a huge ceiling in the passing game, but that could change. We've seen that from, Derrick Henry at times has spiked in passing game. Mark Ingram, when he was at the Saints, had the same kind of deal where we didn't expect him to catch many footballs. So that could change for sure.
Yeah, obviously, just speaking about this roster so far, I mean, this is one of the most talented rosters in the league. There's so much talent on this roster, but you look at there's some positions, running back, safety, some positions where I think the Jets can really use some help. What do you think is the main concern right now for the Jets in terms of position rooms? Where should they look to add?
Yeah, I would say interior defensive line depth
Yeah.
is a key there. So Quinnen Williams is obviously a superstar player, one of the best in the business, but he's carrying that position. I mean, Kinlaw, Thomas, guys that came from the 49ers, not guys that have really moved the needle. They have the pedigree, but they haven't really transferred it to the field. So that's a little underwhelming. I don't know if they'll really aggressively address that. I think those guys can be innings eaters, hold down the fort to some extent because they have so much other talent around them. And you mentioned the other one, which is safety, of course. Chuck Clark missed all of last year at the injury. But before that was one of the most reliable safeties in the NFL with Baltimore. So I do like him a lot. Tony Adams was solid last year as well for them in a pinch. So, I mean, we're getting picky here. Those are the worst situations and they have potential to be solid positions. So I'm not really too worried about it. They're just so strong everywhere else.
Yeah, 100% agree. Yeah, Mike, one more question before we let you go here. If you could share with everyone listening here, what are your final predictions for the AFC East? What are your win totals for the division?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I do have the Jets taking the division. I think they're very much a candidate for the 1 seed in the AFC. So high on them. I think 12-5 is where I am on them. Miami 10-7. You're right. They had a lot of turnover, especially on defense. They've done a nice job lately chipping away with some veteran additions on defense. So that'll still be a really good team. But I mean, are they going to show up when it gets cold? They haven't yet during the Tua era. So 10-7 for them. I think the Bills I have at 9-8. It's tough to bet against Josh Allen and Sean McDermott. I like them a lot. But again, it's not just Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis. They've lost a ton on the defensive side as well, especially in the secondary. So definite some concerns there about them falling off. And then 5 or 6 wins, I'd say, for the Patriots. The Bills and Patriots I also have with really tough schedules, 2 of the toughest in the NFL this season. So that's another factor here that I think helps the Jets' chances of winning this division.
Yeah, you mentioned the Bills receiver room there. Obviously, they lose Stephon Diggs, they lose Gabe Davis. You look and Khalil Shakur, Keon Coleman, and Curtis Samuel basically headlining that room. You look, Curtis Samuel's gotten older. He hasn't produced really these last few years. Keon Coleman, I mean, he had convincing catches in college, but we don't know what we expect from him in the NFL. And Khalil Shakur, 2 years in the league, hasn't gotten over 740 yards, I believe, is where he's at. But Mike, really appreciate you joining me. You got any final thoughts?
I mean, if the Jets win the Super Bowl, I'll be there at the parade. So maybe they'll put me on a float because I'm carrying the flag this year. I'm with you this year, but Yeah, look, love doing the show. Appreciate you having me on.
Of course.
When I was your age, I was doing the same thing. I was just fully into football. I grew up in Philly, so I was a big Eagles fan. So this is awesome. But thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. And let's go Jets. I'm on the bandwagon this year.
Let's go Jets. Mike Clay of ESPN said it. Everyone, thank you guys for watching. And as always, JTS, Jets, Jets, Jets. Thanks, man. Really appreciate it.